our first actual presentation, which I'm very excited about. This will cover research regarding how to put Californians on a sustainable path for a high road equitable economy. Our presenters, Dr. Carol Zabin, do that, haha. Dr. Zabin is the director of Green Economy, the Green Economy program at UC Berkeley Labor Center, which is, I'm going to say this, is not, they don't, even though I'm on the advisory for this, they don't pay me to say this, the premier institution on labor issues on the West Coast. Dr. Zabin, we're so excited to have you here to share your presentation. I'm going to shut up and let you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Josh. And it really is just such an honor to be asked to present here. I'm so supportive of this effort, especially the joint effort of the two East Bay councils, because it really does widen the set of voices and the set of issues, and nobody can say it better than the people who experience the different impacts of climate change, as well as our efforts to reduce our climate crisis, like we just heard in the last panel. And, you know, it is a complicated and difficult conversation because different unions are in different situations with regard to climate change. Of course, we're all getting hit hard by the fires and drought, et cetera, but some people have their livelihood at risk. Some people live next to refineries. Some people, you know, our public sector workers and tax revenues might go down as the oil industry declines. And other unions have really a lot of opportunity to build power and gain membership and improve jobs. So all of that's happening at the same time. And what I'm going to try to do is show some common ground and a way forward, which I believe there is. There's a way forward of addressing our climate crisis, meeting our state's climate goals, and supporting workers in the process. The key takeaways is that, you know, climate policy, it's addressing our climate crisis is a government effort. It's a deep and broad government intervention in the economy. That's the only way it's going to happen. And labor has influence over climate policy because it has influence in politics and policy. And I want to emphasize that right now we have really a once in a generation opportunity with both the Biden and Newsom administrations really supporting and being explicit about both meeting our climate goals and supporting workers in the process. So they are supportive of the big picture, but what I'm going to be talking about a little bit is the devil is in the detail, because there is so many decisions that are made that affect what kinds of jobs are created and what happens to workers. And so the bottom line is, with intention, we can do it. And what I mean by doing it is ensuring good union jobs in the industries that stick around and become less emitting, as well as, you know, supporting pathways into those good union jobs for folks who've been excluded, as well as supporting workers in the declining industries. And it's important to realize how comprehensive climate policy is. It's not one policy. You know, when we were doing the Jobs and Climate Action Plan for the state, which has a lot of detail for folks who are interested in labor strategies related to our climate policy, we reviewed, there's over 100 really important climate policies, because really, the California, which is still the leader in the nation, has developed this comprehensive portfolio that tackles all or most of the industries that are big emitters. And they really use all the tools of government policymaking, from mandates like the Renewable Portfolio Standard or a clean truck rule, to public investment, which is really important, but it's not at all the only important policy, to incentives, for example, rebates on electric vehicles or buying down the cost of energy efficiency retrofits that, that residents and businesses do, to our market program, our cap and trade program. And when you look at the key industries that are affected by these government policies, well, you know, what do? They map onto our labor market. And we have a low-wage jobs problem in California and in the nation, as you all are really aware of, with 1/3 of California workers working in low-wage jobs. So when climate policy affects those industries, you can't expect it to result in good jobs. It's gonna, the jobs affected by climate policy, some will be good and some will be low-wage jobs. And when we actually look at the jobs affected by climate policy, and you can zoom into this since we're on Zoom. If I was in person, I don't think you could see these little letters, but that's one advantage of Zoom. And a notable characteristic is that the vast majority are blue-collar occupations. And there's 2 points to be made here. One is it doesn't make sense to talk about green jobs. It makes sense to talk about greening industries and greening jobs, because an electrician who is installing a solar array on a solar farm is still an electrician, or a bus mechanic who's working on an electric bus is still a mechanic and has to also know how to change the windshield wipers, for example. So really we need to talk about greening jobs, not this separate new group of green jobs. And secondly, blue-collar occupations. Are they good jobs? Well, they're good jobs when they're union jobs, but there are a lot of blue-collar occupations that aren't union. And so we have a low-wage work problem in those industries. And so when we look at the impact of climate policy on jobs in California, we see some what we call high road success, like the renewable portfolio standard, which has really driven the most dramatic decrease in our greenhouse gas emissions by forcing utilities to buy renewable sources of electricity. And it's also been good, in terms of its labor values. The big solar farms and geothermal, et cetera, has been built union. It's been built under project labor agreements due to very deep engagement, both in policy and in organizing by the building trades. But there are low road pieces of all the industries as well, including solar, where rooftop solar really has not gone the high road and is in general a pretty low paid job with few benefits. So the point is, we have to be really intentional about creating good jobs and improving bad jobs. We can't just leave the outcomes to the market, because we'll just perpetuate the growth of low-wage jobs. And here are some of the low-wage trouble spots that climate policy is either putting money into or doing other types of government intervention, and where we can, if we're intentional, incorporate labor standards into these climate actions. And so I listed a bunch of the problematic areas where, with intention and with the incorporation of labor's tried and true strategies, those jobs can be improved. We know the tools. We know in construction, it's project labor agreements and a variety of other tools. In other industries, we know we can use procurement requirements and wage and benefit standards. It's important to think about where the leverage is, though. For example, offshore wind, where we have the ability to incorporate labor standards, is actually the federal auctions of the sites for offshore wind development, and that's where we can put in the requirements or the encouragement of project labor agreements. And so that's one decision you might not pay attention to unless you were deeply involved in that industry. In contrast, for battery energy storage, which is the other big new renewable. That's about, labor just had a fight in the contractor state licensing board. Were the solar contractors able to install that, or do you have to be an electrical contractor? And the vote was 11-3 in favor of the electrical contractor. So that's that industry is probably going to go more high road. So again, it's really about engagement and understanding of the industry, and as Josh said, staying on top of the changes and the evolution of that industry, and getting engaged. But it's all over the place. That's my point, is that you have to engage in many arenas, and a lot of the unions have. Some have been slower. Blue-Green Alliance has been critical in California to really engage in the legislative advocacy at the state level, and there are others as well. The harder question, of course, is the fossil fuel situation. And as folks said, it wasn't climate policy that closed Marathon, but if we are really able to meet our climate goals, the fossil fuel industry in California, which is important, will have to decline and shrink. And one of the places I see a lot of folks talking past each other is on the issue of, how, obviously on the issue of how fast and how to make that transition. And what I see is sometimes a lack of understanding or realism about how if you shut production and shut supply off before you've actually decreased our demand and our consumption of fossil fuel products, leakage is real. That leakage is the technical term that says, you put on mandates and without reducing your consumption of gas, what happens is refineries move to somewhere else and you lose the jobs, but you also are moving, kind of just moving the problem somewhere else, and then importing back the gas. And so there is much more common ground with unions who are affected by possible plant closures or possible job loss when focusing on all the policies that reduce our demand for fossil fuels. And that's from finding alternative renewable energy to building electric vehicle charging station infrastructure, to all the investments that we need to do to rebuild our energy and transportation infrastructure, because investments mean jobs. Doesn't mean you can't then push for greater pollution controls at a local level. And it doesn't get rid of all of the very difficult, which we may see soon in Contra Costa, the difficult issues of at some point plants close when mandates push them, and that can be a benefit to a fence line community who won't live with the pollution, but it does move the problem to other areas. What all labor can get behind, I think, with no questions and no questions about different interests or different positions, is real transition assistance. And there is, again, and once in a lifetime, once in a generation opportunity with money from the federal government and money from the states to support transition, real transition that goes way beyond retraining, that really is a negotiated package to keep workers whole, that involves community economic development and diversification, all the things that we've been talking about labor being at the table. I just want to go back to one slide where we can see the decrease in electric power emissions from electric power, where we're looking at the green arrow, and we can see a big difference between the blue bar and the orange bar in terms of what we've achieved so far. In transportation, well, with COVID, we actually did have some decreases, but we really haven't tackled successfully decreasing emissions from transportation. And so this is the moment when we are going to be confronted with more refinery closures, and we are going to be confronted with a real need to increase investments to lower demand for fossil fuels in the transportation industry. So I think I'm going to stop there and take questions if there's time. But again, the bottom line is we can do this. Policies have to be crafted carefully. We have to pay attention, a lot of attention in a lot of different policies and programs, because those decisions just come down the pike, and we have to get ahead of the curve to be able to incorporate labor values into climate policy. Thank you.
So we have, I know everyone was texting me during your, from the inside of like our inside group. There was a really good question, I think by Peter, had a question for you. So hopefully you read the last Sunday New York Times suggesting a solar panel industry is in danger of becoming becoming gig work. Did you have any thoughts on that? Comment on that article about solar?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I'm really pleased that it's finally getting exposed, because nationally, that's absolutely true. And there was just so often this myth that solar jobs were good jobs. In California, the utility scale solar jobs are very good jobs. Like I said, they're built under project labor agreements. They have apprenticeship investments. They have gone union, and that is because the state building trades got engaged from the beginning and was a major backer of the renewable portfolio standard, and got engaged and convinced the industry that it needed to go union if it was going to grow in California. But that has not translated nationally, and so all eyes on the kinds of conditions the Biden administration will put on the various policies, including investments, but also standards and mandates and incentives on renewable energy, on the renewable energy transition. Because unless we get prevailing wage, project labor agreements, skilled and trained workforce, and the set of tools that the building trades have developed to make those jobs good union jobs.